President, I ask that further proceedings on the quorum call be suspended.
Senator from Arizona.
Mr. President, I'd like to note that we just saw...
Without objection, Senate will be in order.
Mr. President, I'd like to note that we just saw a rather extraordinary event here on the floor of the Senate. I first came to the United States Senate in 1987, and I saw the practice of earmarking and pork barrel spending grow and grow and grow, to the point where last November 2nd, the American people overwhelmingly rejected this practice of out-of-control spending and debt that we have laid on our children and our grandchildren. And I also, along with the Republican leader, would like to thank the members of our members of the Appropriations Committee who clearly heard that message and heard the outcry when the American people began to become aware of what was contemplated to be done here in the Congress of the United States. This outcry reverberated all over America, including the state of Arizona, and the outcry was finally heard by at least 42 members on this side of the aisle. So I appreciate the fact that the majority leader has agreed to a continuing resolution, but have no doubt as to why it happened. It happened because the majority leader didn't have the votes. He didn't have 60 votes that would have then allowed for this monstrosity to be foisted off on the American people. So I want to thank the members here on this side of the aisle and some on the other side who also said they were ready to stand up against this. But most of all, I want to thank the American people. I want to thank those that made the calls, those that sent the emails, those that stood up and called into the talk shows all over America and said, we've had enough. Haven't they listened to the message that we were trying to send on November the 2nd? So I think this is a great victory for the American people today, because we would have spent $1.1 trillion, at least $8 billion of it, $8.3 billion in earmarks that had never had a hearing, that had never had any scrutiny, had never seen the light of day, but had been put in by very powerful members of this body on the Appropriations Committee. So I'd like to extend my gratitude to the American people, the Tea Partiers, those who have aligned themselves with the cause to stop the spending and the mortgaging of our children and grandchildren's future. We've amassed a $40,000 debt for every man, woman, and child in America. The latest commission that reported out clearly indicated that we are on a collision course that could bring down the very economy of this country. So I'm encouraged greatly by the action that was taken tonight to do away with this monstrosity and go back to maybe a one-page continuing resolution to keep the government in business until the new members of Congress and the new members of this body who were elected last November can have their voices heard in the deliberations of this body and how their tax dollars are either dispensed with and those that are borrowed, how they are dispensed with. I see the senator from Missouri is about to speak. I want to thank her for her efforts in trying to bring about an end to this spending spree. So, Mr. President, I again want to express my gratitude to all members, including especially the tough decision that was made by the Republican members of the Appropriations Committee to stand up so that we could stop this thing in its track. And I want to thank the American people whose voices were heard in this body and that forced the decision that was made.
Will the gentleman yield for a question?
I'd be glad
Mr. President,
for a question.
I just, as the most junior member, for those who are not understanding what just happened, did we just win?
I think there's very little doubt that the majority leader of the United States Senate would not have taken the action he just took if we didn't have 41 votes to stop this monstrosity.
So for economic,
I don't think there's any doubt about it.
So for economic conservatives, a 1,924-page bill just died.
A 1,924-page bill just died.
And 6,000 earmarks will not now move forward.
Yes, and I feel badly about some of those earmarks because I had so much fun with them.
and all of the GOP senators just signed a letter to the leadership this morning saying that we should not move forward with this as representatives of the new mandate. And it seems that change has come to the Senate tonight with the death of this $1.1 trillion plan.
I have no doubt.
Senator from...
Mr. President,
I am not finished. Do I have the floor?
Yes. Senator from Arizona has the floor.
I'd appreciate the regular order. I say to, Mr. President, I say to my friend that this may be a seminal moment in the recent history of the United States Senate. This may be a seminal moment that stops the practice which has moved power all to the appropriators in this body, a few, and taken it away from the rest of us and may return us to an authorizing and then appropriating process. But most importantly, I think it's a seminal moment because for the first time since I've been here, we stood up and said, enough, stop.
I congratulate you, gentlemen.
Thank you. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Missouri.
Mr. President, I agree with my colleague from Arizona on many things when it comes to appropriations, including that I have made a decision that earmarking is not a process that I think is the appropriate way to spend public money. But I'm a little confused about some of the righteous indignation coming from the Republican side of the aisle about this bill. The Omnibus 2010 that they have sitting out there, they're wanting the American people to think that this document came from Democrats. They want the American people to think that Omnibus 2010, that all those pages sitting there, were done by Democrats. They weren't done by Democrats. Those pages were done by Democrats and Republicans. Every bit of that document was drafted by Republicans and Democrats, right down to the earmarks. And for the minority leader to stand here and act as if this document is something that is the fault of the Democratic Party when he well knows that he has been involved, I have been involved in terms of trying to get the number down, and I'm glad we succeeded in getting the number down, as has been referenced to the Sessions-McCaskill number. But this was a bipartisan effort to get the number down. And the irony is, guess who has earmarks in there? The minority leader, who just voted on a moratorium for earmarks 10 minutes ago. Did he pull his earmarks out? No. Did any of the Republicans that voted for a moratorium on earmarks, did they pull their earmarks out before this bill came to the floor? We could have eliminated a few pages. So, you know, I just don't think the righteous indignation works. This was a bipartisan effort drafted by Republicans and Democrats. It came to the floor after months of work by Democrats and Republicans. And it was presented to this body in a bipartisan way to vote on. I wasn't going to vote on it. I'm against it. But so I think that I have a slight bit of credibility to call these guys on this notion that this is something that sprung from nowhere out of some back room on the Democratic side of the aisle. This sprung from a bipartisan effort of the Appropriations Committee, and every member on that side of the aisle knows it. They know it. And they know the earmarks in there. There are almost $700 million of earmarks in there from people who voted on a moratorium on earmarks. That's like being half pregnant. They should have said before this bill ever came to the floor and they were asked, would you like your earmarks pulled out? No, no. They were perfectly willing to vote no and take those earmarks home. So on one hand, I would have voted no had we had the vote, and I said that from day one. I voted no on the omnibus last year. I voted no on another omnibus because I don't think it's the right way to appropriate. But this is an equal opportunity sin. The problems with this process don't lie on one side of the aisle. They lie on both sides of the aisle. And the notion that the Republicans are trying to say this is just about the Democrats is the kind of hypocrisy that gives us the lowest ratings we have in terms of confidence of the American people. We need to own up here. This is not about the Democrats. This is about both sides of the aisle and a flawed appropriations process that couldn't get to the floor because of a lot of obstructionism. And when it finally did get to the floor, it came in one package. But it is not fair for the Republicans to act like that all those pages came from the Democratic side of the aisle. They certainly did not, and I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Mr. President.
Mr.